You ever love a game only to watch every sequel slowly forget what made it great? It might look better, run better, even just be plainly better in many ways, but the spark is gone, and it makes you wonder, did the developers ever really know why the original was so good? Or did they just get lucky? Because that's how I feel about vanilla World of Warcraft. Ask any World of Warcraft veteran what their favorite version of the game is, and you'll hear vanilla a lot. It's my favorite version too. And while at the end of the day there is no right answer, vanilla is the most timeless for sure. If Blizzard launched servers for every version of the game and let them run for 20 years, I'm convinced that vanilla is the only one that would survive to the end. It was lightning in a bottle. But when you look at how the game evolved afterwards, you start to notice something. Every expansion moved further away from what made vanilla special. People point to Cataclysm as the beginning of the end, but really, that was just when players noticed. The shift started with the Burning Crusade, and kept going in Wrath of the Lich King as well. People just didn't realize for various reasons we will discuss in a bit. Now, I'm not saying that the original developers weren't skilled, but I'm saying that many of the best things in vanilla didn't come from some master plan. They came from the developers adding stuff they thought was cool. And it worked, because of their good instincts and because of luck. But at the end of the day, it is clear they did not really understand why the game was so good. It worked, but did they understand why it worked? Not really. Because if they did, the Burning Crusade, the first big content update that came right at the end of vanilla, wouldn't be filled with elements that go against what vanilla is on a fundamental level. Now, don't get me wrong, I actually like TBC. I like it a lot. But let's be real, pretty much every major change it brought went directly against the core principles that made vanilla World of Warcraft so special. I know that sounds dramatic, but if you really think about it, TBC might actually be the expansion that did the most long-term damage to the game because of all those harmful decisions kept being iterated upon on every single time. And that says a lot about how little the developers truly understood why vanilla worked in the first place. But before we go full doomer mode, let's break down what those changes were and how they basically stripped away some of the most important things that made classic WoW, well, classic WoW. What's the one thing every YouTuber screams when they talk about classic? The leveling journey was incredible. And they're right, it was, but it wasn't just one thing. It was a perfect storm of small systems working together perfectly. Almost all of that got either gutted or nerfed into the dirt in TBC. Vanilla's world felt huge and alive because traveling was slow, and you were constantly bouncing between zones. You'd finish a zone at level 30, then come back 20 levels later for a dungeon, or a random high level questline, or some niche loot that only dropped there. The game constantly gave you reasons to revisit old places, even after you reached level 60. TBC? You hit Outland, a world that's way smaller than Azeroth to begin with, and suddenly the entire old world is completely obsolete. And even within Outland, the zones don't stay relevant. Tell me why a max level player would ever come back to something like Nagrand once they are deep into raiding. Maybe once in a blue moon for something super niche, sure, but that kind of organic world use is completely gone. In vanilla, level 60 players from both factions would for example go back to Westfall just to farm Dust Devils. That kind of sandbox weirdness just doesn't exist anymore. Then you have flying mounts. Look, they're not all bad, but let's not pretend they did not absolutely murder open world PvP and reduce player interaction across the board. That stuff was central to vanilla's design and flying just wiped it out instantly. Leveling clearly wasn't the focus anymore once Outland came into play. XP requirements to hit max level were lowered, elite quests got nerfed so you didn't need to bother finding a group, and quests gave more XP and gold across the board. Dungeons also stopped being a stepping stone in your journey, they became something you farmed non-stop thanks to the new heroic system. The developers basically restructured the whole game to revolve around endgame content. So what does that tell us about how they thought the game should improve? The idea was that the path to a better World of Warcraft meant going harder on endgame quality and putting way less energy into everything that came before it. The World of Warcraft wasn't the focus anymore, not Azeroth, not even Outland. It became the world of heroic dungeons, raid locks, and arena rankings. Dungeons got way shorter and more linear as well. Blizzard straight up said players preferred the Scarlet Monastery wings over complex, maze-like stuff, so every TBC dungeon followed that template. They all felt the same, smaller, tighter and much faster. Consumables stopped mattering as much, and gold in general lost a lot of value. Quests gave more, dailies pumped the economy, and inflation went wild. Raid sizes got reduced, Horde and Alliance broke class exclusivity with Blood Elf Paladins and Draenei Shamans, all the classes got rebalanced, which was very good, but also was the first step toward homogenization, so it's clear the developers were aiming for a more streamlined, polished experience. Less friction, more balance, but at the cost of class and faction identity, and less reason to actually interact with the world and the other players. The only feature that felt true to Vanilla's spirit were the attunement chains for raids and even some dungeons. But even those were gutted later on and never came back, so they clearly did not think they are what the game needs. And look, if I dug into PvP, I'm sure I'd find even more examples of things being stripped down. But I never cared about PvP in this game, so I just don't know. Couldn't be bothered. But let me know what similar examples like this you know of in the comment sections regarding PvP. Why not even also throw a like to the video and subscribe to the channel if you liked the video so far. So yeah, there's no real debate. TBC absolutely gutted a lot of what made Vanilla great. I love TBC, but that's just the facts. The developers didn't expect Vanilla to blow up the way it did. They were hoping for maybe 1 million players at the very best and predicted around 400k to 600k players. But when it exploded, that's when they said, okay, we need to take this seriously now, no more throwing cool ideas in just because we think they're fun, we need a real plan. And that's when they lost the plot. Vanilla was special because it didn't have a unified version. It was messy, it had charm. You could feel the different voices in the dev team doing their own thing. That chaos made everything feel alive. Once they started overthinking and optimizing everything, the soul started leaking out. If they had figured out that quote-unquote players prefer short dungeons before TBC launched, we never would have gotten places like the Blackrock Depths, Dire Maul, or even the Deadmine, and that's a depressing thought. TBC was made by the same people who made Vanilla, and that makes it obvious that they did not understand what made their first game great, and honestly, neither did the players. Everyone was too busy enjoying the shiny new stuff to think about what we were giving up. The focus on endgame did improve the raids. That's why every expansion usually nails the raid content to this day. But the trade-off was that the game itself got smaller and less meaningful. But back then, there were no red flags. Or at least none that people took seriously. And that's what's wild. If I'm right about all of this, if these changes were clearly setting the game on a dangerous path, how did no one at Blizzard see it? How did the player base not catch on? Well, some people did. There are old forum posts calling this stuff out. People saying things like, if leveling isn't meaningful anymore, the game's gonna suffer a lot later. Blizzard got lucky and unlucky at the same time. Yes, gutting the open world in TBC was a huge blow to the game's long-term health, no question. But the players either didn't notice or didn't care. They were too busy enjoying all the brand new content, and no one was really asking themselves, what happens to this game in 5 years because of this change? And let's be honest, in 2007 most players were still total noobs. A ton of kids were still stuck in the Barrens at level 18 when TBC dropped, barely understanding what was going on at all. The game was still growing, everyone was still figuring things out. The honeymoon period wasn't worn off yet. And then came Wrath of the Lich King, an expansion that, for me, proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the developers had absolutely no idea why Vanilla was so good, or what was actually good for the long-term health of the game. Because they didn't just keep the direction they started in TBC. They doubled down on every single decision that pushed the game away from what made World of Warcraft special to begin with. Pretty much every change that chipped away at the vanilla identity in TBC, Wrath went even harder on. Flying, even faster and easier to get. Leveling, even faster. Golden XP from quests, buffed again. Mounts, now available at level 40 and dirt cheap. Plus, we got heirlooms for our alts as well. Then we get the emblem system. Heroism, Valor, Frost, you name it. Which let you grind dailies and spam dungeons to get high-end raiding gear. Loot wasn't earned through adventures anymore. It was bought through gamified vending machine. Speaking of dungeons, Wrath made them so easy they were basically a joke. You just brainlessly chain ran them for badges every day. Trial of the Crusader was the patch that killed the idea of expansion-wide progression by giving out loot that was better than anything from Ulduar, even though Ulduar was still kinda new, and this is also when random dungeon finder came in. Goodbye open world completely. So yeah, whatever was left of the vanilla spirit got deleted even harder in Wrath. But interestingly, it didn't feel like a new betrayal, because Wrath didn't really add any new damage. It just cranked up the TBC dial to 11. All that was 100% new was the dungeon finder. People didn't notice or care this time, not because this was the first expansion ever, but because the Arthas hype was massive. Everyone was excited for that story payoff, and all that hype ballooned the player base a lot. World of Warcraft looked healthier than ever, but the reality is, most of what people say Cataclysm killed was already on life support by the end of Wrath. And then Cataclysm dropped, and again did exactly what Wrath did, just harder. Leveling got even faster, gold poured in like candy, mounts came even earlier, and most of what was left of Vanilla's design was gutted further. It introduced a few new systems that chipped away at the game's foundation, but the biggest blow by far was, of course, looking for Raid and the world revamp itself. Now, the outrage over the world revamp, that didn't come because people were still deeply immersed in Vanilla's world. That world already died when TBC launched. The problem wasn't just that zones physically changed, it's that there was nothing left in the game's design to support that old school style anymore. If Vanilla's world had stayed exactly the same, but was played with Cataclysm mechanics, it would have still felt empty and soulless. The only difference is that now, it was unrecognizable visually too, and unlike TBC or Wrath, Cataclysm had no nostalgia fuel from being carried by Arthas or the first expansion ever factor like TBC to keep people blinded. And that is how we ended up here. At the end of Vanilla, the developers didn't actually understand what made the game great. And starting with TBC, they began focusing on a completely different vision. The worst part is that they thought they were making it better. Every change, more accessibility, faster progression, streamlined systems, less friction in general, felt somewhat logical. But those changes were quietly killing the heart of the game. And no one noticed. Not really, at least not at first. Wrath of the Lich King got away with it because it was riding the Arthas hype. And TBC was the first expansion. That's why I genuinely believe the original developer team didn't understand what made Vanilla great. Not back then, and of course not now. Because when J. Allen Brack said,
"No. And by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't. Remember when you had to spam cities and say, need a tank, need a tank, need a tank during the Burning Crusade days? You don't remember that because now you just push a button that says go to the dungeon. You don't want to do that."
he wasn't some rogue idiot spouting nonsense. That was a shared belief at Blizzard, I am sure of it. A belief built on years of positive feedback from expansions that, ironically, were slowly tearing the game apart from the inside. It wasn't just one bad decision. It was a cascade of well-intentioned ideas, each one chipping away at what made World of Warcraft feel alive. And by the time Blizzard finally realized the damage, it was because the players started screaming for classic, not because the developers themselves had some great epiphany. A lot of people have said it already, but I will say it again. What led to the downfall of World of Warcraft from its position as an unstoppable juggernaut was the cockiness of the developer and their complete lack of foresight. The first 3 versions of the game seemed like flawless hits that everyone loved. And yes, we loved them, but that love was as much about timing, context and culture as it was about design. Players never had the responsibility to think long term. We were just enjoying the ride, and that's what we are supposed to do as customers. But the developers, they have that responsibility, and instead of thinking ahead, they judged everything by short-term metrics and instant gratification. They created Vanilla World of Warcraft, what I honestly believe is still the best MMO ever made, and then immediately after that, those same people, probably with good intentions, steered the game in the exact opposite direction. Slowly, then suddenly, somewhere along the line, they decided that everything that made Vanilla great and everything that made Vanilla Vanilla was actually a problem to be fixed. and they spent the next few expansions fixing it out of existence. So yeah, vanilla World of Warcraft is in my eyes the best MMO ever made. But the painful reality is that it only happened because of pure luck. The developers didn't fully understand what they have built. And that's exactly why, even today, the best iteration of that game isn't made by Blizzard. It's made and improved by fans on private servers. It's sad, but it's true. Now, we're almost certainly getting a Classic Plus announcement at the next BlizzCon. And yeah, I have hope. The idea of building on Vanilla's foundation and actually enhancing it could lead to something absolutely legendary. Maybe one of the greatest moments in gaming history. But do I trust Blizzard enough to get excited? Not really. We'll see though. If you liked the video, hit that like button and consider subscribing. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think. I don't get too many, so I pretty much respond to everyone. Anyway guys, peace.